Now we're going to be transitioning a little bit to taste. And so I want you guys to think of here, if you like the taste of beer, okay? This is another thing where we're having the participation question that is posted. And so you can pause this video now and fill out the posted participation question. And after you respond, take a look at how your response compares to your classmates who have already responded. So some people like the taste of beer and some people really don't like the taste of beer. So we're going to be talking about how there might actually be a genetic link, a very strong genetic link between your preference for or against beer. So take a moment now to fill out the online participation question. True or false, you like the taste of beer, or C, you've never had it. And this is anonymous, so you don't have to worry about how your response is. It doesn't matter. I'm not asking if there are maybe people that are taking this class that are not yet 21. I'm asking about the taste of beer, not whether you sort of drink it regularly. I believe that even when I was growing up in high school, my parents at one time gave me a sip of beer, and I did think it was disgusting. So you don't have to worry about how you actually respond on this. This is simply just a survey with regards to taste. And now we'll watch a really brief clip.
New research suggests that whether or not you like the taste of alcohol may be in your genes. In the study, people with one version of a bitterness taste receptor gene said they found an alcoholic drink to be less bitter tasting than those with a different version of the gene. Study author Dr. John E. Hayes says that people who find the taste of alcohol less bitter may be more inclined to start drinking, which could have implications for identifying those at risk of becoming problem drinkers. The study participants rated the overall intensity of a drink that was 16% alcohol, which they sipped and then spit out, and also scored their taste sensations for 3 minutes after a cotton swab soaked with 50% alcohol solution was applied on the back of their tongue.
This genetic component has actually been replicated a fair amount, and that if you, I don't recall what the particular gene is, but that if you are dominant or recessive in this particular gene, that you're much, much more sensitive to bitter taste. And beer is really quite bitter. Most alcohol is bitter, but some beers can be very, very bitter, especially if they're very hoppy and stuff like that. And so that if you have one particular allele pair with this gene, then you're going to find alcohol, and particularly the taste of beer, to be much more bitter than if you didn't. And this, of course, does not have anything to do with whether or not you would become an alcoholic, but if you did find beer to be quite distasteful, then you would be less likely to drink it, and also less likely to then become sort of addicted to it and develop any sort of habituation to it. If, however, you did not find alcohol as distasteful, and that it was not as bitter and it was a little bit more pleasant, then you'd be more likely to drink it, and then possibly be more likely to develop tolerance to it, where you'd have to drink more and more. So I just thought it was one of those things that was particularly interesting, because alcohol is drank quite heavily. Lots of people will say, oh, well, beer could be an acquired taste, you have to get used to it, it's very cultural, but most of the time it kind of tastes nasty. And so I think it's a really interesting example to bring them into class about how taste can be acquired in terms of cultural significance, whether that's for good or for bad. So you can learn a little bit more about some of the genes that might be underlying the particular tastes that you have with regards to food. Because one of the things about this gene is that it's not really specific to alcohol, it's actually quite specific to bitter taste. So if you have a sensitivity to bitter tasting alcohol, it's also highly likely that you have a sensitivity to broader bitter tastes, particularly bitter vegetables such as Brussels sprouts or spinach, stuff like that. So our receptors for taste, we actually have clear differences in taste thresholds and preferences, and these are really obvious within our species, and it's one of the things that varies a great deal. And so it's interesting because we all have the same taste receptors, but then we can have such huge varieties in terms of how that information is perceived. And so that's commonplace. But differences, for example, in vision, that we all expect that basically everyone sees the world or hears the world very much the way we do. But we know that most people don't taste the world that we do. So it's interesting then that some senses are perceived to be more constant across individuals than others. Taste and smell are perceived to be less constant across individuals. And it's also really interesting since taste and smell are the senses that are most linked with emotions, motivation, and our desire to sustain ourselves in terms of eating behaviors and reproductive behaviors. So we have super tasters. These are people that would be very sensitive to a particular taste, that don't like beer. And we would also have non-tasters that would not taste a particular flavor. And there are 5 different types of taste receptor types. They each respond to a different chemical component of food: sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. And you can have super tasters or non-tasters for each of those receptors. So you could be a super taster for sweet, but a non-taster for salty. And then the 5th receptor is actually called the umami receptor, and this is especially sensitive to glutamate. So it's really interesting because I don't think most people realize that you actually have a receptor that is really sensitive to sugar. And so this might be one of the things that is also a problem in terms of our sort of addiction or over-reliance or sensitivity to things that are sweet, because we actually have receptors that are especially sensitive to the presence of glutamate in food. And these would have been things that would have signaled a long time ago that, oh, you should eat this food because it has sugars that your bodies need. But now, in our present environment where everything is refined, being maybe a super taster and having the umami receptor would probably be problematic, because then you would be like really sensitive to differences in glutamate, or maybe it actually would be better to be a non-taster so that everything didn't taste quite as sweet. So it's really interesting then, with all of the information that's coming out now about how people can become addicted to sugar and how sugar is in everything and high fructose corn syrup, that we actually have receptors on our tongue that are particularly sensitive to glutamate. Here is a taste pore. So with our tongue, we have a particular pore, and we have these microvilli that process bitter, sweet, sour, and salty information. And this information comes together and forms your cranial nerves, nerves 7, 9, and 10. And these form a gustatory pathway that enters the brain. This main gustatory nerve is known as the solitary tract. This gustatory region in the insula is dedicated to taste, so it comes in here, travels into the insula over here. And as you can see, this taste again travels through the thalamus, so it comes in and travels through the thalamus, and then it goes to the insula. And then you also have a region in the orbitofrontal cortex that processes a mixture of olfactory and gustatory input, and it gives rise to our perception of flavor. Flavor is actually a combination of smell and taste.